Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar being hosted by the Lake Victoria Aquaculture Association. This webinar is intended to be an informative event, but also an opportunity for all of us to be able to engage with what is one of the most prominent, one of the biggest opportunities in terms of the industries that this country has, that is also underestimated and underrated in so many different ways. This particular conversation is going to be around the issue of legislation and regulation of the sector. As many of you know, many industries rise and fall on the environment in which they operate. We have seen many industries in this country which have fallen purely because of regulation and legislation. Industries that at one time or another were really creating jobs and contributing to the economy of this country. You can talk about sugar and textile and rice and many others. And as we sit here, a number of us are concerned that the aquaculture industry, which is still nascent, still in its early growth stage, needs to be nurtured, needs to be supported, needs to be developed. And a big part of that is making sure that we have the right regulations, we have the right laws, we have the right frameworks to govern this sector. My name is Peter Ndeng. I am one of the founding directors of the Lake Victoria Aquaculture Association, or LVA Association. The LVA Association was started only about 6 months ago. It was registered here in Kenya, and its particular mandate was really to try to support in many different ways the development of this sector in the lake region. When it comes to the issue of laws and regulations, we all know that there's no such thing as a regional law or a regulation. It's national. It is the same National Assembly. It's the same ministry that oversees the sectors. So in this case, a number of groups, a number of stakeholders have come together to join hands in addressing some critical issues that are concern to a number of people in the way this sector is being regulated, is being governed. We are going to have about a 1.5 hours, so just under that, time together. And the way it's going to be structured is that we're going to have a presentation from a young lawyer who I'm getting to know, who's really, really sharp and one of those people who we need to keep your eyes on. He has a lot of experience in the aquaculture space, working with national government, with the county governments. But he's also a policy expert in his own right. His name is Victor Odhiambo Akwom. I will introduce him in just a moment. After his presentation, which is going to give us a broad view of the issues, a bit of history, a bit of the context around which we're going to have this conversation, we're going to then go into a panel discussion, and that panel discussion is going to be involve 5 people who have their hands and feet in this sector in different ways. Movers and shakers, leaders also in their own rights. And during that panel discussion, we will also have Q&A. Please feel free to ask questions. Feel free to chat in the chat room, and we will try to engage you as much as possible in the conversation. Obviously, the time we have is too short to involve everybody, but we'll try to capture as much as we can to throw your questions to the panelists, and also just to get you to react to the presentation that we're going to be hearing. And then at the end of that, we're going to wrap up with some kind of way forward. There's no point in having this kind of gathering. Over 200 people have registered to join us here. We hope many of them will actually participate. The session is being recorded, and we look forward to engaging in a way that will lead us to some concrete actions, and we hope to touch on some of those at the very end of the session. So without much further ado, I will introduce our panelists at the end of the presentation, which includes the chair of the LVA Association, Honorable Chen Bell, who will make his remarks and also gets to introduce LVA board members at that point. But for right now, I don't want to waste too much time. I want us to get right to the meat of why we are here. And I want to invite Victor Odhiambo Akwom to come on and take it away and help us to see what is around us, what are the issues, and that will set the stage for the conversation we're going to have. Victor, it's all yours. Victor, you're still muted, so please unmute yourself.
All right. Can you hear me now, Victor? I believe I'm not muted anymore.
Yes, we can hear you, Victor.
No, we can hear you. Thank you so much. Very good.
All right. What of the presentation? Is it on your screen?
Yes, Victor, it is. You can go ahead.
All right.
It's on the screen, very clear. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for that. My name is Odhiambo Akwom, and I shall be giving policy and regulatory highlights relating to the aquaculture sector. And Pete and colleagues, thanks for inviting me to make this presentation and in any event have conversations around aquaculture. My presentation, it's about 10 slides, so I'll try to ensure that I take as little time as possible without necessarily also undermining, without necessarily impacting on the quality of information that I intend to pass by way of this presentation. My presentation is titled Policy and Regulatory Framework Review, the Aquaculture Sector. Quite a number of things have happened within this particular sector, taking into account especially what has transpired within the regulatory landscape in the last 2 years. For the sector, I'll start with some bit of philosophical underpinning to it. I've always wanted us to imagine ourselves in a scenario where, when asked, what do you want for the sector? That is the aquaculture sector. I know people would have various responses to that, but if you were to ask me what I want for the sector, in terms of philosophical underpinnings, in terms of impact, in terms of outcomes and stuff like that, I would imagine a sector that is not only defined by a robust, streamlined, adaptive legal, policy, regulatory, and administrative framework, but also a sector that ultimately issues relating to sustainable growth, issues relating to effective management and equitable development are actually part and parcel of the same. All right, that would be the kind of philosophy that I would really urge for in terms of what an effectively functioning and effectively working aquaculture sector in the country would be all about. And more importantly, I would expect that the sector is basically, governed by principles that include transparency, stakeholder inclusion, environmental stewardship, economic empowerment, contribution to food security, and more importantly, national development. We are not. Of course, there's quite a lot of entrepreneurship that when it comes to aquaculture, but in all of those, and going by what ideally is agreed internationally, aquaculture is a great practices around aquaculture. It's a great source of food security. And in this case, Kenya is one of the countries that ideally stands to benefit, to a very great extent. when it comes to food security. But that by itself is not automatic. So it means that a great deal of investment in terms of manpower, resources, and other related resources be invested into the sector for the sake of food security, for the sake of national development, economic empowerment, and things like that. But then, where are we now? When I look at the sector the way things stand now, over and above the ideals that I've pointed out, the fundamental question that I would ask myself, and in any event, you people might also get to ask yourself the same question. The question is this: what guides the sector? All right, what guides the sector? What are our policy aims for the sector? And in terms of the policy aims for the sector, from where do we therefore borrow the kind of regulatory directions, the regulatory direction that we've taken insofar as the law that we have currently in place and the attendant regulations that have been passed, including the regulations that were just passed the other day and which in any event also have an effective date of 1st of January 2025. What is guiding the sector? All right. As things are, the aquaculture sector does not have a policy backing. We do not have a policy in place. I know that there's a draft policy that has been done for the sake of driving and for the sake of defining our long-term vision, overall sector goals, the essential actions to be achieved insofar as that vision is concerned. Of course, some of the principles that I've pointed out too. But then again, that is a draft policy. I had the opportunity of looking at that policy. I also gave my views, courtesy of a consultancy with an entity that I shall mention later. And yes, there are quite a bit of misgivings in that policy, a draft policy, including the fact that you can't do a policy without doing a proper situational analysis, because from the situational analysis, you get to understand your circumstances as they are. And in terms of those circumstances, you're also able to draw out the challenges. And in terms of the challenges, therefore, you get to know and understand what you need to get to do such that you are able to get to where you want to go to based on where you are at the moment. So in the absence of an aquaculture policy, then some of these issues, some of the issues that we're faced with are not therefore, some of the issues that we're faced with, are not therefore surprising, because how do you run a sector when you've not been able to determine a long-term vision for it, when you're not able to understand fully and in any event develop laws around that particular vision and things like that. So one of the things that we are suffering at the moment is the fact that we do not have an effective policy in place for purposes of guiding this particular sector. Another thing that happens is the fact that you look at the way things are managed within the sector, taking into account the fact that aquaculture is a devolved function. The Constitution is quite manifest in terms of clarity as to the fact that the sector, aquaculture is a devolved function, and based on the fact that it's a devolved function, and I'll have a comment to make on the fact that on Monday there's a Gazette notice that was equally issued out, and in that Gazette notice, clarity was confirmed. Clarity was made as to the fact that aquaculture is a devolved function. But more importantly, what I wanted to make clear is that, yes, it is a devolved function. Within the sector itself, we have quite a number of institutions which work with various mandates. We have quite a number of institutions with various mandates. Some of those mandates might be complementing, others are not necessarily complementing. There's a bit of friction here and there. And that does not augur well with the overall intention of having a very clear institutional framework that ideally carries and delivers on the function that is devolved governance. You look at it, we have institutions, not only do we have the national and the county governments, but we also do have institutions operating at the national level. We also do have institutions operating at the county level. And in terms of the operations and mandate, some, like I've said, are working in a complementing manner, others are not necessarily doing the same. So that poses a major problem. It poses a major problem in the sense that issues around issues around intergovernmental coordination, intergovernmental relationships, which are crucial for the effective working of the sector, ideally are not met. We would have expected that on the basis of the fact that the two levels of government are supposed to work jointly, though distinct, but ideally they should be working jointly for purposes of promoting what we're calling both horizontal and vertical coherence, such that when it comes to the sector, the ultimate aim, the ultimate goal would be to drive our operations in such manner that there's value, there's impact, and more importantly, there's growth when it comes to the sector. But there's quite a bit of friction based on all these issues. Now, stakeholder and public participation, like I've said, indeed, there's a need to develop the policies. Indeed, there's a need to develop laws that are very essential for purposes of guiding, if not effectively running the sector. But we also must not run away from the fact that a very, very huge component of all of these are the people that are involved in this particular sector, whether as stakeholders or beneficiaries of some of the activities that are run, that emanate from the operations of the sector. Now, participation of the public in the formulation and implementation of public policy is crucial. It is very crucial to the extent that quite a number of people have been able to challenge processes, and these processes are ideally public in nature. They've been able to challenge some of them and and by way of such challenges, they've been able to get orders which actually bar public entities from undertaking some of these activities, notwithstanding the fact that they're provided for in law. You will remember the Malindi decision on public participation, wherein the court was able to declare, I think section 42, is it 42 or 41 of the Act, as not being constitutional, in the sense that in the sense that the activities relating to the manner in which that particular section made it to the Act, and for the fact that those who stood to lose much from the inclusion of that particular section in the law were not involved, were not given an opportunity to air their views. The court did not hesitate from making a declaration to the effect that that particular section of the law was not proper from the standpoint of the Constitution. That's the Malindi decision. And it is interesting that Malindi decision brought about some intense activities from the national government. That is when, for the first time, I saw an amendment act to the Fisheries Management and Development Act of 2016. That was last year. Well, of course, from last year, we've seen quite a number of versions of that particular bill, but you could see that from the fact that the court acted, the court made a decision declaring a section of the law unconstitutional. The next thing that I saw from the establishment was to come up with an amendment bill. Whether or not the amendment bill was being done in good faith, that is up for debate, but you could clearly get to see that the declaration of the court actually shook a part of the establishment. And by them getting shook, the effective thing that was done at that point in time was to come up with an amendment bill. All right. Now, reinforcing the policy and regulatory framework, like I've said, I don't want to make this presentation very long. So I've started from the ideal, I've started from the general, and these are issues that I know a number of you, they might possibly not be very new to quite a number of you, But now, dealing with the reality, dealing with things as they stand right now. Well, how do we reinforce the policy and regulatory framework? Because all that I've stated so far are ideals. And if our sector was actually functioning like we do expect it to function, then as a matter of fact, we will not be confronted with some of the scenarios that we are confronted with, and which quite a number of them are posing a major challenge. Now, for us to reinforce the policy and regulatory framework, for us to get back on track, because I believe somehow there's some bit of derailment. We may not have derailed the entirety of the train and its wagons, but I believe that a few wagons are off the track. And if this is not arrested in good time, then we might lose the train together. I mean, we might lose everything, possibly the train and the tracks. Now, we have to start by appreciating our constitutional architecture around evolution, and also appreciating aquaculture as a default function. The reality is that aquaculture is a default function. We cannot run away from this fact, all right? And it does help that on Monday, the 16th of December 2024, a Gazette notice was issued. And in terms of the Gazette notice that was issued on Monday, clarity has been made as to the fact that, well, before I say clarity has been made, the obvious has been stated. And this is a fact. I mean, when I say this is the obvious, ever since 2013, and I will mention the fact that I was not only involved in the processes that led to the formulation of the Constitution itself, but I was also actively involved in the implementation of the Constitution, having effectively worked for the Commission for the implementation of the Constitution. And one of the things that we did in circa August 2013 was to get involved with the former now what is it called? Transition Authority to help with the process of transfer of functions to the county governments in line with the 6th schedule to the Constitution. So what this Gazette notice has done is to clarify what has always been stated, and for which has always received quite a lot of opposition from interested quarters, which is that aquaculture is a devolved function. And in terms of it being a devolved function, the national government is responsible for norms and standards, and the county governments are responsible for implementation, if not regulation, of aquaculture. All right. If I'm to read the Gazette notice itself, for those who will be able to get it, it's page 5850. The national government is supposed to develop national standards and norms. The national government is supposed to develop a national aquaculture policy. All right. The second thing, in terms of roles and responsibility, if not functions, the national government is responsible for the development of national standards and norms in aquaculture. Now, the county governments, in terms of the responsibilities that they assigned, reading still from the Gazette notice, the county governments are in charge of implementing the national aquaculture policy. They are also in charge of implementing national standards and norms in aquaculture. And then thirdly, the county governments are in charge of promoting and regulating aquaculture within the county, which simply means that not only are they in charge of implementation of aquaculture, but they are also in charge of regulation of aquaculture within their respective borders. All right. The second thing is that we need to pay attention to is that in terms of regulatory direction, then the onus now is on county governments to come up with modalities of regulating aquaculture within their respective borders, if not boundaries. And one of the most effective way would be to possibly develop a model law to that effect. The FMD Act, I need not to overstate this fact. It has been stated, and I will restate it. As currently formulated, the FMD Act does not comport with devolution. And in any event, there's lots of curiosity that is being raised as to why we've had many pieces of many amendment pieces of this particular legislation being passed. I saw one last year, 2023. I have seen one this year, 2024. I had the opportunity of interacting with the Council of Governors together with stakeholders drawn from the county governments. We came up with a memorandum on how best to amend the FMD Act, all right? Amend, review, let me use the word review, on how best to review the FMD Act 2016 for purposes of ensuring that it comports with the Constitution, because otherwise, as it stands, it is heavily centralistic in terms of the way in which it approaches some of these issues, and some part of the deficiencies that are that come with the FMD Act 2016. I've seen there have been quite a bit of attempts to resolve those by way of regulations. It might not necessarily be the ideal way of dealing with the matter as grave as this particular one. Stakeholders must be given the opportunity to participate in wholesome processes that are aimed, that have, extract value in terms of coming up with a legislation that speaks not only to fisheries, but also aquaculture. That also begs the question as to whether or not we need a standalone aquaculture act, like we've seen in jurisdictions like South Africa, where at least for South Africa, they've been able to come up with an aquaculture act. And in terms of that particular legislation, there is a very fair appreciation of, one, the fact that South Africa by itself has got 3 levels of government, and more importantly, aquaculture is an activity that must be undertaken in a very broad manner, in a very consultative, in a very common-based manner, just for purposes of, for purposes of ensuring food security, development of the sector, and things like that. It is surprising that the FMD Act talks of, Fisheries Management and Development Act, but you get into the details of that particular statute, especially with reference to aquaculture. I think the part of development is quite lost. You don't get to see, feel directions in terms of what the law actually desires, what the law actually intends insofar as development of the sector is concerned. It is more to do with regulation, things like what you can do and things like that. So we need to relook the law from a very normative and standards standpoint. What are these things that ought to be done? What are these principles that we need to put in place for purposes of running that particular sector? And once we do that, taking into account the devolved nature of governance in the country, and of course, the larger interest, which is the development of the sector, then we might get somewhere. Then, of course, the institution within the Act, quite a number of institutions within the Act, and in any event, as an offshoot of devolution, there are quite a number of institutions that are operating within the sector. And like I'd already indicated before, it is disturbing that not always are these institutions working in a manner that complement each other. I mean, you find that majority of the times they are at loggerheads. I happen to, I've witnessed firsthand operations along the lake. I happen to own land along the lake, and at times when I'm seated by the lake, it makes for something at times worse than a comedy show when you see the kind of operations that are undertaken in the lake, the agencies that undertake those operations, and some of the brazen conflicts as between those agencies when those operations are being undertaken. So I do believe that we are presented with an opportunity of revisiting some of these things and getting our house in order insofar as aquaculture is concerned. All right. So in terms of still reinforcing the policy and regulatory framework. We need to, adopt policies and practices that are transparent. There's need for synergies and collaborations and all of those things. There's need for intergovernmental coordination. I will not overstress some of those points because I've already made them. Then we also need to define ways and means in which the sector's contribution to development and food security might be enhanced, including proposing programs and projects that are necessary to that effect. For what reason does the sector exist one way or the other? And for the fact that it exists, what are we supposed to do, whether private investors, whether public sector players and things like that? How do we eventually get to make the sector work and make it work sustainably? And in any event, and more importantly, be able to contribute to food security as is expected. There's need also to improve on training and all of those things, training and education for the workforce and things like that. Now, let's get to licenses and permits, because this has been an area of immense interest. And of course, not only does it bring about quite a bit of interest, but it has also been quite an area of inconvenience to many people who've ventured into the practice of aquaculture. And you can see majority of the times, and I don't know why this is just something that for the most part has been a trait which is largely observed in Kenya. In Kenya, majority of the times, when we are coming up with laws, and I can take a bet on this, pick randomly 50 laws in this country, you will realize that within each of those laws, okay, let me rephrase that. I can take a bet on this one. If you are to pick 50 laws randomly, I can bet that in more than 70% of those laws that you would have picked, you will find that in each of those laws, there is the establishment of an entity, agency, or something like that. And it is also very likely that there will be, of course, there will be the expectation of payment of fees, licenses, and permits, and things like that. So in Kenya, looks like the most effective way of coming up with the legislations and regulating some of these particular sectors some of the sectors would be to do so by way of regulation, by permits, licenses, and in any event, the creation of agencies. And as it is, and I know majority of you can relate with this, it is a very, very big inconvenience in the sense that in terms of the administrative bottlenecks and the hindrances to doing, and the hindrances that come with the conduct of business when you have such kind of, multiple licenses, multiple institutions, some of them working in conflict with each other, others working in complement with each other, but ultimately for the fact that each of them has got something to be paid. They could be working together, but at the end of the day, you have to pay one for one item, pay the other for another item. It is a nightmare for quite a number of people. So, and of course, when you have these multiple licenses and things like that, you might realize that even for your own planning, it becomes a problem because you might have one license running and another one has expired in the middle of, one is running, another has expired. That by itself is a problem. Why don't we just have a one-stop shop where we are able to have all of these licenses, one, knowing them as they are, and also not having licenses just being, expected left, right, and center. There has to be a very determinate way of going about these licenses and understanding what each of these licenses or permits are all about. You can't just wake up and impose a license because that by itself also undermines, if not increases the cost of doing business, and more importantly, compliance also becomes a difficult thing to achieve. All right. So there's a call for clear delineation between authorizations and responsibility that comes with licenses and permits. We need to understand what licenses are for, what permits are for, right? And the roles that the two levels of government have in that regard. Because if you look at it, the truth of the matter is that even the regulations and the act, majority of the licenses that they are speaking to are licenses at the national level. And since this is a devolved function, we've not also gotten to the level where I mean, we've not been confronted with a scenario whereby the county is also, as a matter of fact and law, telling you that, hey, we also have got the legislative, if not the constitutional mandate, to charge some of these licenses. So if you put together the licenses at the national level and the licenses at the county level, and the value proposition that comes with them, you realize that possibly there's done. So that whole particular environment and need for licenses and permits needs to be looked into, and and clear lines, clear delineation set, and all of that. Now, then of course, still on licenses, and this is licenses and fees under the regulations. That is legal notice 126. And in any event, passed on to the 6th schedule, part 1. There has been the introduction of 50,000 licensing fee for all aquaculture establishment, regardless of size, operating public water bodies. And further, there is a 5% ad valorem fee on the value of landed fish. All right. So sorry. So there's 5% ad valorem fee on the value of fish, of landed fish. Now the question is this, or rather a concern: what is this fee for? All right. How was it arrived at? All right. And was there a conduct of was there any impact survey undertaken on the cost of compliance and things like that? Ideally, when it comes to when regulations are being done, and we are talking of now a properly working system of coming up with these regulations, a regulatory impact assessment report ought to be undertaken. All right. And in terms of that regulatory impact assessment, you are able to look at so many factors, including the cost of compliance and the benefits and cost. If the cost outweigh the benefits, then it does not make sense to proceed with some of those proposals in the regulation. So, like for this 5% ad valorem fee, it feels and actually this feels like a tax, because if you're calling it a fee, but one cannot exactly tell. The benefit from that accrues from that particular fee, right? Then it becomes a tax, because you see, taxes are, at the end of the day, we pay taxes whether or not we've got direct benefit from the same. But when it comes to fees, there has to be correlation between the money that is being asked for and the attendant service that accrues from that fee. So from the way this has been, from the way this has been crafted, I do not understand what it is all about. And in any event, why this particular 5%? Why this particular figure of 5%? Why not 0.1% or 0.5%? 0.05% or 0.01%? Why just 5%? So these are things that ideally should have been subjected to a wholesome process of stakeholder consultations, so that people are able to understand what this is all about, what it is intended for, and the kind of value that the same comes with. And if a figure has been proposed, why that particular figure and not a lesser figure, and things like that. And of course, the 50,000 shillings license fee for all aquaculture establishment, regardless of size, operating in operating in public water bodies. I don't know where that 50,000 shillings came from, And are we certain that this is affordable? Is it sustainable? Is it equitable? When the whole operations, that is aquaculture, and the kind of players based on their financial muscle are looked at or evaluated, is it a figure that is affordable to everybody and things like that? Now, so when I look at all of those, and basically still on the matter that is fees, fees should aim to recover the cost of providing regulatory services, right, such as licensing, inspection, monitoring and enforcement. But looking at the way even what is it called? The way the Gazette notice has put it clear. Aquaculture is a county function. And it being a county function, I would expect issues around licensing, inspection, monitoring, and enforcement to be undertaken at the county level. So if these are activities that are going to be undertaken at the county level, then why would we have to pay such a fee to a national government entity? Right, so that's an area that we need to look into. Then it is no lie that we must also not come up with fees that are not only multiple in nature but also very burdensome. And for the fact that they're burdensome, they end up making the aquaculture sector in Kenya, uncompetitive, be it locally or internationally. All right. So my advice would be that we look at the broader development. I mean, when it comes to these fees, we should be guided by the broader development goals of the aquaculture sector. And in terms of those broader development goals, then, and if ideally we were speaking truthfully to the need to develop the sector, then we would be hearing, we would at least have been taken through, motions of, we would have been taken through processes wherein we get to understand that the need for research, capacity building, infrastructure development, and environmental conservation. But just paying fees for the sake of it, I doubt that that would be welcome to anyone and things like that. Even taxes, we just saw the other day with the Finance Act. There are quite a number of lobby bodies. What are they called? There are quite a number of entities that were able to make representations to Parliament and tell Parliament that some of these things might not necessarily work if they're effected. We also have got the opportunity to make it clear that some of this particular fee, that is 5% ad valorem value of landed fish and things like that, that will not really work for the sector. Potentially and eventually, it shall not only make the sector not work, but it might also make quite a number of entities fold up their businesses and look for alternative elsewhere. That is not desirable for now. Then, it would be important also to ensure that some of these fees, the fee setting is undertaken through a process that is not only transparent, but also consultative in nature. And with that, I would want to stop at that. Thanks, Pete.
Wow, thank you so much, Victor. That was such a packed presentation that to even try to squeeze into in the time that we have here is actually an impossible task. But we want to take some time to unpackage this. I think this conversation clearly is just beginning and it's going to continue. At this point, I want to transition to our panelists and just give them a chance, first of all, to introduce themselves and then just make a remark. These are people who are working in this field, people who are in touch with a lot of realities on the ground, to give them each a chance to just tell us what they're doing and also to respond to some of the things you've said in not too long-winded a way. And then we'll also see if we can take some questions and remarks. And like I said, the time is just going to run really, really fast. So at this point, let me introduce one by one. The first person is Honorable Mheshimiwa Ochieng Bell. He's a former MP currently a fish farmer, chairman of Lakeview Fisheries, but also the founding chair of the Lake Victoria Aquaculture Association. So, Chair, just unmute yourself and give us your thoughts. I know you have a lot of passion for these issues, and let's hear what's on your mind.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Victor. I really paid very close attention to what was going on. But before I make any comments, I think I've been introduced enough. I don't want to expound on it more than that. We are all interested in the sector. I just want to go straight into what has happened to date. I'm so glad that we have all joined into the LVA platform, and we have various sectors today. I can see we even have other stakeholders. We even have government entities who have joined us to listen and also to participate. Thank you very much for coming in, and we'll make it as brief as possible. And me, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know how to beat about the bush. I just want to hit on and say, Victor, you have brought it on. You have generalized it, but then you become very specific. And because the time that we have, we only have to maybe come in and not lament a lot, but say it as it is and move on. We must realize that Lake Victoria, Kenya is only having 6% of Lake Victoria. Uganda and Tanzania have the bulk of it. And they also have their regulations, which I don't think are as punitive as the one Kenya of the 6% is bringing. What we are trying to do, generally, from what I'm seeing, is we are trying to reintroduce the importation of fish into this country. Somebody is very keen to reintroduce, to kill the fish farming and bring in, it is now easier and cheaper to bring in fish from other countries, from China and even Uganda. It is cheaper now to bring fish from Uganda than to grow it in Kenya. In other words, you're killing your own industry. Victor, I thank you. At the end of this, I don't even want to move into what recommendations are we getting, because we need to get right into it now because we don't have time. I propose, as we talk, that these legislations, this Gazette notice, which we are looking at as legislation and regulation, are too far-fetched for the small industry that is growing in aquaculture to continue. We can't, because as you can see, there is no development. I said it the other day, it's like 10 commandments. Thou shalt not, or thou shalt, thou shalt. That's all we are seeing. We don't see any development. Nobody is encouraging me to do anything. It doesn't even appear that way. And now that you have already mentioned that it is a devolved function, I agree with you. Because of this ambiguity, I propose the suspension of the regulations, as we are still looking at the amendment of the Act. It is still on the table being amended, and here we are pushing regulations, which comes before, we are putting the cart before the horse. So immediately, let's start looking at suspension of the regulations and get these things in order, get all of us together. Let's honestly sit together as a team to progress this further. I don't want to say much. I would have introduced my board members, but since we are in a public forum, including others, we are only appreciating the fact that LVA has offered to chair this and to bring everybody on board, that at the end of this, we will come up as a united front and get this sector going accordingly. I thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And I think, like you said, one thing that certainly came out of that presentation was that if you're making regulations, it should be based on an act that is sound. There's a question that is being asked about the soundness of the act itself and whether it needs to be repealed and re-looked at. Let me introduce a second panelist, Stanley Moria. Stanley is the CEO of the Aquaculture Association of Kenya. And I just want to give Stanley a chance to say his thoughts, and then we'll move on to another person.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Peter, for this introduction. I think my name is Stanley Moria. I'm the CEO of the Aquaculture Association of Kenya. Mine will be just logic. Just logic. If you have a paper and a pen, go through with me this. When you are assuming you are an established fish farmer with one pond, so you have a pond and you have your fish. Labor only, employing one employee. Let's assume you are paying him or her 10,000 per month. Is 120,000 shillings per year. Cost of feeding that 1,000 fish is equivalent to almost 30,000. Then you have other miscellaneous and power and energy, that is 20,000. The total comes to 170,000. Let's assume you produce a fish between 300 to 350 grams. You are having approximately 300 to 350 kg per year in that pond. 300 kgs of fish, for me, I'm speaking on a point of a smallholder farmer. 300 to 350 kg. Let's assume you sell 300 kgs and your family consumes the 50 kg at 400 Kenya shillings per kg. You get a turnover of 120,000. You subtract your sales, which is 120,000, from 170,000, you are at negative of 50,000. Then the government, my main aim is at slide 10 of our presenter, which I very much appreciate. 50,000 for an aquaculture facility. You subtract, you get a negative 50,000. Then the government or the Kenya Fisheries Service wants to take another 50,000 from your pocket, and you have already lost 50,000. So you are at negative 100,000. I will reiterate what Honorable Bell has said about the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not. Then for me, I would gladly, if somebody tells me I want to start a fish farm, I would gladly tell them the 11th commandment, which is an aquaculture commandment, is that thou shalt not practice aquaculture in Kenya. What does that mean? Even a person who has a kitchen garden, who have a kitchen garden, and in his or her kitchen garden, they have included a tank with 300 fish or 200 fish, they shall not practice fish farming. What does that mean? We go back to importation. I better import fish than produce fish. Recently, I was doing a survey of the job creation of the fish farming in Kenya among our members. I realized that the minimum for the commercial aquaculture farmers, the ones who are having 3-5 pots, they are having 2 employees. We have 70,000 farmers. 70,000 farmers who are registered with us. 70,000 farmers times 3 to 5 employees. How many people are being employed in Kenya? We are losing this job, their job. That means if we continue as it is, job loss will be high, and food, because people the former president used to say that fish is the next frontier for food security. Now, we are negating that factor. So we depend on fish, and we say fish is for the rich, not for the common. And we plan to say whatever the IFAD is trying to do to improve aquaculture is being brought down by these regulations. I submit.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stanley. I want to hand over to Bella Kingi, who's the CEO of Bolena Farms in Siaya. I know Bella as one of the most passionate speakers and activists, I almost call her, for equity in the fishing industries. Bella, don't take too long, but let's hear some of your passion.
Yes. Actually, I'm glad everybody has sort of taken my thunder, because short of repeating what our chair has said and everybody has said, Stanley has said, I can just reiterate and say, one, our good learned friend talked about a policy. Where is the policy? Because how do you come up with regulations and it's not based on any policy framework? So when I look at also the way they've written it, I'm in agreement. This thing was actually designed, I can't get into their heads, but it is designed to kill the aquaculture industry. And when I look at the precedents that we've seen before, cotton and sugar, that's why I'm really convinced this is designed to actually fail us. And when you look at the job creation that our colleague here, Stanley, talked about, let us also look at the complete value chain. So, 70% of our expenditure, 60 to 70% of our expenditure is feeds. And what are feeds? Feeds is agriculture. And if it's already creating employment, you're going to kill a lot along the value chain. Soya growers who've started, and all these other growers that we actually depend on, especially since I also produce feeds. So I'm looking at also just our regular person in the backyard. One thing I know, we didn't want to belabor the point, but we already behind the scenes diplomatically talked with the government for the last 2 years, had meetings, and they nodded and pretended they were listening, but they produced the same document. So that means they were not listening. They had no plans to change anything. So I know we are trying to be diplomatic, but I think at this point, we are beyond diplomacy. I think the gloves are off. I think we really have to reject it totally and start from zero. That's all I can say, because otherwise you're basically telling Bella that Bella will pay tariffs, but is the Chinese going to pay tariffs? If you're planning to bring in fish, for example, somebody is going to be putting a cage in there. So even if I stick in this business, it means that if you're favored within the government, if your father is the one who's created this, you're not going to pay those tariffs. So you can sell your fish at 200 per kilo, but for me to make ends meet, I have to sell it at more. So that means they're basically telling me, listen, you're out. So this lake will be owned by everybody else, but not us from this region. So that is why I'm passionate about this, and we really have to go back from zero and reject this thing in totality. Thank you.
Thank you, Bella. I think there's a point that Victor raised when he spoke about the fees and these permits and so on. He said that it is irregardless of the size of the enterprise. It could be a very small enterprise or a large enterprise. And that's a really very interesting point that I'd like Caesar to talk about. Caesar is a CEO. He's Chief Development Officer at Victory Farms. And many of you know Victory Farms is the largest aquaculture company in the region. And it's continuing to grow. So Victor and Caesar, can you just jump in and give us your thoughts on the presentation and also your take on these issues?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pete. It's been interesting listening to the presentations, more so because Victor, Stanley, the chair, have really spoken to most of what I really wanted to speak to. But before I get to answering your question, I'd like to focus on food and nutrition security. Aquaculture is capable of producing the lowest cost animal protein in the country. You know, I believe the average cost of tilapia now is around 380 to 400 shillings per kilogram. Now, most tilapia consumers earn less than 1,000 shillings per day. And these are the people who are most nutritionally insecure. This tax, I guarantee you, will directly impact the most vulnerable population. If implemented, there will be a radical reorganization of the aquaculture business. There'll be possible relocations. There'll be a reduction in existing jobs and jobs created. And for those who remain, there will be a greater emphasis on automation, accompanied by price increases and reduced investment. Meanwhile, as has been said, this will definitely promote Chinese imports, because as producers, we have to reevaluate the business sense of continuing production compared to simply importing and trading. And that is a very unfortunate situation, because Kenya has the opportunity to be one of the best cost competitive producers of tilapia in the world. We have that opportunity. And I think I have to remove my Victory Farms hat and put on my hat as a resident of the Lake Victoria area. So I'm going to put my Victory hat aside and say this. As a resident of Lake Victoria area, this fee is malicious. Ask yourselves, good people, in which other industry do you have a similar tax or fee? Where is milk from cows' breasts taxed as it lands in the bucket? If you've heard of it, please tell me. Where are coffee beans taxed as they land at the collection center? Where are maize cobs taxed as they enter storage? Something is amiss here. And it is not intended to do the industry good. It is intended to harm the industry. It is intended to cripple this industry. This fee is intended to stagnate the growth of aquaculture and frustrate its transformative potential for the populations around the lake. It is intended to discourage aquaculture in public waters and promote aquaculture around the Lake Victoria away from the lake. And that is a great irony. It does not make sense. I am saddened by this fee and what it implies. But I am hopeful that we can make things right. Because the implication of not making things right is that we are going to take several steps backwards in the history of this country. Now, putting back my Victory Farms hat, really, as a participant, as a stakeholder, in the aquaculture industry. This fee is, to say the least, very frightening because it does not bode well for the future of the industry. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Caesar. Some very strong, passionate words there. I think in a little while we're going to take some Q&A and some remarks from people on the floor that may want to ask some questions to the panelists or to the speaker. But I want to move on and bring on another woman that I'm also just getting to know. But when we talk about passion, here's another one. Suzanne Kamiti is the Vice President of the African Women, I hope I say it right, Suzanne, Fishing Traders and Processors, or Processors and Traders. You'll correct me there. And wears many, many hats, including having started the group of sort of an association of hatchers in this country. Suzanne, I know you have some very strong opinions about what we're talking about. Let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you very much to my other colleagues on the panel. Indeed, today, as we sit here to have this conversation, we are here so that the sector, all those concerned, can be able to recognize the concerns that we are raising as stakeholders in this value chain. Also seek common ground to explore actionable solutions that will benefit us, as my colleagues have said. One, remember we have smallholder fish farmers here. Their role is critical in food security and in the local economies. We need to recognize the challenges that we're already facing: access to finance, technical skills, market linkages, efficient production, cost of feed, 70%, as Bella has said. We as fish processors and traders, our critical role is bridging producers with markets, victory farms and other big players. We need to see that their role is driving innovation. They're supporting the smaller players. They are bringing in sustainable practices. They are bringing in the numbers in production. And therefore, when you go and look at the different nodes in the value chain, then you see that the team sitting here is working together to be able to find a solution to this pain in our toes. So I'd like to thank each of us associations. Thank you, LVA, for inviting us on Tuesday. We had Cask and the hatcheries. But what are we trying to tell the stakeholders? We work together. We can work together. Being in silos will not move us anywhere. As we look at this great conversation, it bothers me too, like it bothers my colleagues. I think Victor mentioned in his conversation the curiosity, many amendments. Are we, as government, to reduce the number of hatcheries so that it can have a monopoly? That's a question mark. When you go to the competitiveness we keep talking about, is aquaculture competitive? Is it going to be competitive with what we want the government, what the government is planning to implement? Are we going to be addressing livelihoods, nutrition, food security, and sustainability? Lastly, this same government has invested heavily in the aquaculture sector, and not just an investment, loans. Let's look at the programs that have been, the projects that have been there. How many billions have been invested in aquaculture? Why then do you want to kill the same sector that you've put in a lot of money to? And this is money that needs to be repaid back by the Kenyan citizen. Is it making any sense? So I'll ask to government, suspend with immediate effect. Let us go back to the drawing board. Let us have consultative and real practical conversations to be able to right the sector, as Caesar has said, because this is for us. Hatuhami Kenya. Kenya is ours. This is our sector. A lot of us are there, do or die. And therefore, government has to learn to listen. We are the people. When I think that it has gone to parliament, I ask myself, that representative of mine, that representative of yours, do they really know? Do they really understand what they've been doing? Therefore, an immediate suspense, go back to the drawing board, let's put right what is wrong and what we are bringing up. Thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. And yes, Peter, let me correct you. So we have the Association for Women in Fisheries Blue Economy Kenya, which is a national chapter of the African Women Fish Processors and Traders Network, 44 countries within the continent. We are also within the region, but I also wear the hat of the Secretary General of the Commercial Aquaculture Society of Kenya. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that correction, Suzanne. I think we have a star-studded panel here. And I'm waiting for a question or two from the audience that I can throw at some of you. But as we're waiting for that, I'd like just to ask Victor, because it almost sounds like there's a chorus here, one-way conversation. And I'd like to ask Victor any reflections from what he's hearing from these panelists, without going into any depth, just your thoughts on the way this conversation seems to be flowing.
Thanks for that, Pete. You know, the views that are being aired by those who are practitioners of the trade. Let me call aquaculture for now. Let me equate it to a trade for now. These are practitioners. These are people who deal with the daily issues that oscillate or emanate from the actual practice of aquaculture. So I know they're speaking passionately about the said issues, but even in terms of framing, there's always a way in which the issues that they're raising have got some kind of regulatory sense to it. The point that is being made is this: we need to have a properly functioning aquaculture sector that extracts value both from a public standpoint and from a private standpoint. Okay, the private persons that are in the trade of aquaculture, they are not there for charity. That is the truth. All right, but they are there to make an impact, be it for the possible little monies that can be made from it, and in any event also helping with the contribution to national development and food security and things like that. Comparatively, the government has got a responsibility of ensuring that the environment upon which aquaculture is set to thrive actually is put into place. The laws that are passed for purposes of aquaculture are laws that aid investments in the sector, attainment of food security, and national development. We cannot be having a law that says fisheries management and development. You open that law, you see nothing to do with development. You see everything to do with the do's and don'ts. All right, and majority of those possibly are don'ts and things like that. Let us have a wholesome view of the sector. Let us agree right from the basics in terms of policy direction. What do we want for the sector? How do we conceive the sector to be? And therefore, how do we get there? And in the course of getting there, who has to do what, when, and how? Taking into account the fact that aquaculture is a devolved function, the national government has responsibility in terms of setting up a normative framework for purposes of, the sector, and the county governments equally have got the responsibility of, implementing national policies around aquaculture. Let's have a wholesome conversation. Let's make ourselves very competitive when it comes to aquaculture. It cannot be that Kenya is failing, but Tanzania and Uganda are succeeding. It makes no sense that we share the same lake with Tanzania and Uganda, but it is cheaper not to grow fish in Kenya, but to go to Uganda and bring fish back to Kenya. I'm not even talking of China. I haven't even put China into scope at the moment. I'm talking of our neighbors. Let us make this thing work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor. I'm going to ask for Daniel Wandera. We were waiting for some questions.
We can get Wandera, or I can get Wandera myself.
Okay. Is anybody hearing me? Hello?
But, I'm going to let you chime in and say your thought or ask your question. I hope your hand was not by access to.
I just have two questions. Okay, my first one is to Victor.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
My first question is to Victor. We are being told, according to what is being read there, is that 50,000 Kenyan shillings is going to be a fee for anybody operating in water bodies. So to all the panelists, when they came to vote for my hatchery, they told me the fee for hatchery is 50,000. So am I paying? Actually, what is in the law is says public water bodies. So how am I paying for hatchery that is in a private land my 50,000? I wish to at least recap on that. How does my hatchery come into a public water body that I have to pay 50,000? The second question is, why do we have a lot of associations in aquaculture sector? A lot of them in Kenya. But actually, what we have seen so far is LVA is the only one making a voice on this issue. So which means that if we didn't have an LVA, then automatically aquaculture will still be the same thing. So can we have in a way that these associations, people call themselves chairman, secretary generals, treasurer, whatever. What are you doing to help us understand and also push? Or even before these regulations are gazetted, you help the farmers understand. I think, Chair, that is my concerns.
Thank you very much. Good point. Caesar, I'm going to throw this at you. Can you respond to this?
Thank you, Pete. I think the first thing is to understand that when you talk about public water, the public water is not restricted to the lake. If you get water from a river or a lake, that is still public water. So I would hazard a guess that your hatchery is getting water from some public resource. And if that's the case, then, according to the law, you are liable to this fee. However, if you're getting water from a borehole or a private dam, then that's a different case. Thank you.
I think there's a fair point here also about the sensitization. There's a lot of things that happen at very high levels where people who are operating on the ground are not sufficiently trained. I think Suzanne brought this up, informed and guided. And I think these regulations that we're talking about here are also in that category, that if you listen or read the kinds of record keeping, the kinds of compliance issues that are required, for a regulation that's being effected from the 1st of January, it is quite mind-boggling that actually the people who are even the very established players do not know these things yet. So I'm looking at the time and not wanting to stretch this beyond what we had said we would do. I think there's a point that's been made here, and that is that this is a conversation that is continuing. Victor raised many issues here, all the way from the Constitution to legislation to now the current regulations that people are up in arms about. The immediate concern, it seems, are these regulations. The secondary to that is the need to form some kind of open conversation that allows people to speak in a genuine, honest way, speak into what needs to happen. I don't think there's anybody here who is against regulation. Everybody knows that every sector, every industry must be regulated, and it cannot function without regulation. But the point that seems to be made here is that we cannot have regulations that actually, on the face of them, appear to be killing the industry. And that's point has been made severally. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't like belaboring a point. This has been a very interesting engagement, and I'm so glad that you've taken the time to be here. It seems clear, and I'm going to ask Honorable Chin Bell to sort of give some closing remarks, because he, at the very beginning, jumped the gun and said we need to do something, and he said we need to stop these regulations. These regulations that are on the front burner are being effected from 1st of January. Honorable Mbeo,
Chair, can you give me a minute to just clarify something? Just less than a minute, please.
Yes, go ahead, Senator.
Okay, there's a concern that other associations were not concerned about these regulations. The issue is that we knew about them, we were aware about them, but we were trying to solve the solution as individual associations through the concerned entity, that is Kenya Fisheries Service. For the Aquaculture Association, okay, I'm talking for the Aquaculture Association of Kenya, AK. We were trying to have a conversation with through the Director General of Kenya Fisheries Service so that we can solve this issue amicably before it goes to public. So, and I know other associations who are doing that. So, the perception in the public that other associations who are not in this is wrong. It's only that we came together now so that we can voice our concerns as all the concerned stakeholders in the country. And we are working not for our individual members, but for the entire aquaculture industry in Kenya. Number two, we have realized that when these public participations are done, that is now from my experience. When these public participations are done, the people who are invited are not the correct. I don't know. I don't have the one to put it. They are not the protectioners. Anybody, even without a pond or who has an idea with aquaculture, can be invited, and with that they form a public participation. But the real practitioners are not invited. What I would urge the members, we have a very wide range of members in the group, is that if you are invited to be in a public participation, kindly inform other members who are also in this group. You can also create another group if you wish or we can even join another group if we wish, so that we can get information that there is dissemination or public participation of certain public bill or public regulation. Because we may get there and we are told that there was public participation and somebody participated. How do you verify that? I submit.
Thank you, my friend. Good point, Stanley. I think we're all learning, and one of the things that I would say is emerging is something also a bit unique in many sectors. That is people coming together and putting aside silo thinking. And this is one of those moments where different organizations, different players, different actors in this sector, including development partners, including academics, researchers, and so on, to come together and to be able to deliberate and come up with a way forward that is good for Kenya. I think that is what should be driving all of us. And on that, I want to do what I was going to do earlier, is hand over to Honorable Mbeo, who is the chair of LVA, and also has been in the various multi-group meetings we have had with some of the other associations and so on, to just wrap this up for us in a way that would allow us to go home, even though the conversation continues, but with some direction on the way forward.
Thank you, Pete. I think what has transpired today is a very good beginning. We have begun well. And Susan, we also want to thank you for starting the process a few days ago and getting us to this level. I believe I jumped the gun, Pete, but I deliberately did that because some of these things, if you wait too long, when you're going round and round in circles, you might never get to where you want to. What has come out, and I think it came out the last time in our last meeting also, is that there is a need to be listened to by the systems, by the powers that be. I don't know where those powers are, because I don't think they are at Kenya Fisheries Services. Kenya Fisheries Services is only an implementer, like they told us last time. So whatever they are told to do, they'll do it. So Stanley, even if you talk to DG, it doesn't matter how many times you talk to him, his orders are implement. He cannot say, I cannot implement, because the government wants money. You go to the minister will tell you, the government needs money, so we cannot listen. Now, in short, what I'm trying to say, that we must seek redress in the fastest time possible. That means, Pete, and everybody on board here, let us agree that we had agreed earlier anyway, and I'm letting everybody know that we had agreed earlier as LVA and the other groups that met 2 days ago, including Aquaculture Association of Kenya and CASC. I will include any other interested parties that are involved in this, because we are many, that we go forward as a team. Pete will lead us onto this. We have agreed. I don't think I should mention it. Pete will mention, because he's been doing this. We had commissioned him, allowed him to talk to other development partners to be able to help us move on to the next level, which means judiciary. We must go to court because we cannot go to January 1 with this kind of situation. We'll be in limbo. So generally, and obviously, the thing that we must come out here with is we are stopping these regulations from moving on until further consultations are done, and maybe broaden it and say, look, even the act itself is suspect. There's a lot of things that need to be done. So we will include everything in the package so that we can come back and not make it a wishy-washy thing. I am saying this with due respect, that from here, we need to issue a press statement which should capture everything else that we've discussed here and what we want to do. Tonight, we are confirming, we must confirm, Pete, you must confirm to us whether we have a lawyer in place and the brief that has been given. If there's any amendments to be done, let us do it and make sure that we are in court before the recess so that we are in. And any interim orders should be given as such. I believe that's all I can say for now, so that we capture this because of lack of time. We only have about 20 minutes to go. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everybody. I think if I can just clarify one thing, maybe just underscore something the Chair has said, is that as a small group that met of these varying stakeholders the last couple of nights, really concerned about these issues. And the question was, what are the options? What options do we have between now and January 1 when these things come into effect? We can't go back to Parliament. Parliament has gone on recess. We cannot, just writing letters to different people is not going to get us anywhere. And January 1, things begin to happen. So it would appear that this is the only viable option. And I think this is something allowed to us by the Constitution, and we will exercise the right on behalf of the players of the sector to say we want to have a sober conversation that builds the sector, not destroys the sector. And I don't want to say much more than that, Chair. Your words are, I think, quite conclusive. And I'm, on behalf of all of you, I just want to say thank you for this conversation. I also want to say that in the coming year, we're going to be having more webinars. If I can give a small plug for LVA. LVA is a member-based association, and we have been on an initial membership drive, which we're going to close as we go into Christmas. And we thank all of you who have signed up to become officially members of LVA. We will send you the outcome of this deliberation, link, the recording, but also give you opportunity if you're interested in joining LVA. It is a broad-based association. It is not a narrow association of narrow interests. So with those remarks, I hope that you have enjoyed this conversation and look forward to much, much more. Thank you all, and wish you all a lovely evening. Goodbye.